I'm Bronwyn Williams. I'm a futurist and economist, and I'm working with Altron at the moment to try and figure out what is driving growth in South Africa and what is holding us back from our full potential. And to that end, today I'm joined by Dr. Adrian Saville. And Adrian, on this show, please do introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are.
Thanks, Bronwyn. Good to be with you. I'm Adrian Saville, and I'm a professor in economics, finance, and strategy at the Gordon Institute of Business Science, and I also look after a business called Boundless World, which is about helping companies, businesses identify places to go, how to get there, and business models, designing business models that are fit for purpose.
Yeah, so it's clearly no surprise why Pope invited you here to this particular conversation where we're looking at growth, because a lot of your academic work has been around that very subject. And in fact, you were the lead researcher on a very well-received and well-researched piece of work that looked at what makes some countries grow and other countries not grow. So can you tell us a little bit about why you embarked upon that research and also what you found?
Sure. If we're pursuing growth, it's helpful, useful to understand why growth matters. And using evidence from across countries, across markets through time, there's compelling evidence that suggests economic growth corresponds highly with the self-reported happiness or well-being of societies, that institutions not only survive but perform well in the presence of robust economic growth, and that companies do well in a supportive growth environment. So, whether we're using the lens or the perspective of family, of society, of the firm, or just of the individual, there's an overwhelming body of evidence that says economic growth matters. And if it matters so much, then the question becomes, where does it come from?
Well, maybe you can talk us through what those 6 factors are. I mean, I know who they are, but maybe other people don't.
When we set out on this work, we dropped all assumptions, and we had access to a magnificent big body of data, 160 countries, 60 years of data, 1,200 line items per country. The results of that work identified 6 ingredients: high levels of saving and investment, demographic structure where you actually want babies, you want more people coming into the workforce than going into retirement, education and healthcare in an emerging market setting need absolutely no introduction, but importantly, healthcare we find in this work carries a higher weight than education, health first then education. Openness, which refers to the fact that no country has become prosperous by building walls, that it is almost a necessary precondition that you're connected to others. And the 6th ingredient is institutions, policies and institutions, that there are sensible policies in place and then institutions capable of implementing those policies. And those are the 6 ingredients.
So when you analyze that according to the South African market, what's the sort of scorecard for us? What are the ones we're failing the fastest and furthest at?
When we first produced this work, 2012 or so, we established that South Africa's structural growth rate then was quite a long way shy. It was probably in the early 3% at best. Since then, unfortunately, and the ailments are well known to us, but since then that growth structure has steadily decayed, and we now sit with a growth structure of about 1.5%, which is a long, long way away from what's needed. And perhaps, more importantly, is to put that growth number up against the population growth rate, where if our population growth is 1.5% and economic growth is 1.5%, you are in what we'd refer to as a per capita income trap. So our incomes per person in South Africa are the same size today that they were in 2010 at the time of the World Cup. 14 years absent per person growth.
Yeah, that's there's some problems there that need to be solved, right? But of course, where there are problems, there are also opportunities.
Sure.
Related to that, I also wanted to ask you around the difference between sort of absolute and relative growth, right? So what are your thoughts around relative growth and actually achieving competitiveness in a global market? Which is one thing getting your own house in order, but you still got to compete.
So the world economy's average growth number over the last decade or so has sat close to 3%. We've been growing at 1.5%, meaning we are getting, in terms of the size of the South African economy versus others, we're falling behind. But not only that, when we adjust for population growth, South Africa is falling even further behind. And I think that's an indictment on our policymakers, that all well and good to talk about fantastic ambition, those words simply aren't translating into action, and we are falling behind.
What do you think is missing, or can you just spell that out for us?
In critical ways, South Africa has transformed fundamentally. Our political transition has been just off the charts. But political transition, absent social and economic transition, you're missing the vital ingredients. And so, all well and good that we can vote, but you can vote, but if you don't have a job, or if your incomes per person are the same, or a metric called the Gini coefficient measures inequality, and we are actually more unequal today than we were in the early 1990s. So we've got fundamentally important work to do when it comes to economic and social transformation. And on that front, where South Africa has fallen down is our healthcare system remains a long way off the pace. We actually spend more as a percentage of GDP on healthcare than any other middle income country, but it doesn't translate into effective healthcare outcomes. And I think that's explained in part by the fact that we spend on preventative rather than primary healthcare. The second is in education. We also spend more on education than most other middle-income countries. When we look at our work in the six-factor model, what we find is the most important place that you have impact in education isn't in school, and it's not in universities. It's in the first 1,000 days. So our education and healthcare, I think, are arguably the most easily remedied. But the place where we have a fundamental weakness in South Africa, the glaring gap, is in savings and investment. And we do not have a financial environment that is inclusive. Many people argue that in order to save, you have to be rich. This is a nonsense. Every single country that is rich today was once poor. So it's a nonsense that you need to be rich in order to save. But regardless of our level of saving, not only are we not saving enough, but it isn't translating into fixed investment. Highways, harbors, hospitals, fiber optic cable. That is the big missing gap.
And you mentioned some of the things that we could be investing in, but I want to interrogate that point a bit more. I mean, you've spoken, obviously, in the six-pack, the most critical things are getting healthcare and education right, and they're so intertwined, especially in those sort of first 1,000 days of a child's life. But that is a long-term investment. We invest in those first 1,000 days now, we kind of reap that investment in 18 years' time. So the most important things aren't necessarily the most urgent things when it comes to perhaps quick wins. Drilling down to that investment pillar specifically, what are the low-lying fruits? What are the sort of soft underbellies of investment that can get us the fastest return on investment?
First, South Africa has to work at establishing a savings and investment culture. Unfortunately, we have, you're talking about quick wins.
Are there any?
To shift culture and behavior is hard. And South Africa is characterized by a consumer culture rather than a savings culture. If we look at the savings rates in low-income societies, India, China of the 1980s, 1990s, South Korea, Singapore of the 1950s, 60s, 70s. Those are all low-income countries. Bangladesh in the 1990s. The saving rate at the household level sits in the region of 30%. Now, to speak to South African families and ask, what's your savings number? It's zero or negative.
Yeah, so I mean, you talk about sort of systems and structures that can support saving, particularly household saving, which is what you've been looking at. Do you have any sort of perhaps words of encouragement to get people to understand why and how we can change those sort of cycles, those expectations and sentiment cycles around South Africa Inc. towards more virtuous flywheels?
Yeah, I love that question. So, first, optimism is not about trying to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat.
No, you've got to be sensible.
We are in a tough environment. And, oftentimes in talking about South Africa's circumstance and the six-factor model, one of the questions that's put to me is it necessary for a country to go into crisis in order for it to, become a happy place? Fortunately, helpfully, the answer there is no. We can find lots of places that have actually got to magnificent outcomes without going through crisis. I'm here, I'm invested in the country, I'm building a business, I've worked around the world, and quite frankly, I'm hard pressed to find more exciting and more purposeful places to be than in South Africa. I think the constitution of the country, I don't mean political constitution, I mean, our makeup, presents not only so many problems, but so many things to fix. And out of that, incredible purpose in work.
Okay, so a very similar question. I mean, aside from problems and challenges of which we are world market leaders, what do you think South Africa's unique selling proposition is or could be?
So often, South Africans think that somehow we're unique. And in many ways, we're not unique. We've got a grossly skewed income distribution. We've got pervasive poverty, entrenched unemployment. That's not unique. Let's go and find lots of other countries around the world, and we find similar economic and social curses. So let me just make that point and then get rid of my grumpiness. What does South Africa have that perhaps is somewhat unique? We have got a climate and a geography that makes us one of the most magnificent places to live and work and visit in the world. I wonder why South Africa hasn't thrown its doors open to people who are looking to work as entrepreneurial tourists. That we're going to come here for 5 years, we're going to build a place. Where could you build it? I mean, Cape Town has to be. Paarl, Stellenbosch, choose the satellites, but wow. And the cost of living here is incredibly competitive given where the rand is relative to other currencies. So I think that there is a huge opportunity in that.
Well, perhaps there's something else that we could lean into as an opportunity, and that is embracing the idea of growth at all, which is what you opened with today.
Yes.
In that the idea of growth, just
Good
like
comedy.
the idea of optimism, is not very fashionable among many places in the world at the moment. And perhaps that is an opportunity just to embrace the fact that there is potential for us, and that it's kind of our birthright to go after it, to go and grab it, right? I don't know if you have any other sort of closing comments on the growth versus degrowth kind of worldviews that we get to choose as a society, what we're going to embrace.
So I suppose to answer seriously, in closing, growth is not an end in itself. Growth necessarily needs to be inclusive. It's got to be transformative. It's got to be sustainable, and growth is not about getting more of what you have, but taking ourselves to a future that is better. Now this sounds like a political statement. I don't mean it politically at all, but a future that's better for all. And here, South Africa, not only do we have abundant opportunity, we also have got enough problems to fit into that opportunity. So I love, your thoughts on imagine what we can grow into if we can get into the business of designing these things that are fit for purpose.
Adrian, thank you so much.
Thank you.